Welcome, my name is Patrick Flanagan, and these are the psychological factors of collegiate football players. The target population is traditionally male. There are some females that play, but football is definitely a male-dominated sport for the most part. In college, ages between 18 years and 23 years of age. There are some outliers to that, but that's the general range. Multiple ethnicities play the sport of football. The highest is African Americans at 44%. Next is Caucasian and Pacific Islanders. Latinos and Asians are very much so underrepresented as presented in the Race and Gender Report Card for College Sports by Lapchick in 2017. Players definitely come from all over the country. Definitely a geographic region like, I don't know, say take Washington State University that's up here in Pullman, Washington. A lot of their players come from the great state of California. You look at a place like Notre Dame and they literally will get players from the West Coast and the East Coast. Most of the hotbed places for recruiting typically come from California, Texas, and Florida. But suffice to say, each individual university is going to have at least one player from their state on it, even though we do have different hotbeds around the country. It really makes the football team extremely diverse. Needless to say, football is a very popular sport across the country. USA Today released a finance report in 2017 where several universities, they get donated like $44 million donated to their programs and athletic departments, $30 million, where without these donations, they would operate in the red at a huge deficit without these multi-million dollar donations. So they're receiving these donations because it is so popular, which also has some added pressures to be able to win, because without the win, they might not get the donations, or people get fired, or there's a lot of snowball effects to that places an emphasis on high level performance in order to be able to operate and do the things that they're able to do. But the pressure doesn't stop with the NCAA Division I football bowl subdivision category, right? Filter all the way down to junior college level or high school level. And those players that are playing at the JC, they're not getting scholarships and they're not getting multi-million dollar donations to their institutions, but they're aspiring to play at those institutions, at those Division I institutions. So if they're going to be recruited, the JC player needs to be the best that they can be. The high school player needs to be the best that they can be so they can transfer to those universities. So again, regardless of the collegiate level that you're playing at or that you're interested in, there's a tremendous amount of pressure for performance. One of the reasons why football, in my opinion, is such a wonderful sport is it's a beautiful juxtaposition between mental and physical fortitude. It takes a whole bunch of strategy to be able to go out and execute the types of plays that are done at a collegiate level. But at the same time, there's still this saying of it's not the X's and O's, it's the Jimmy and Joes. Those players have to go out and execute proper techniques as fast as they can against an opponent that's also trying to play as fast as they can and execute their techniques to defeat. So it's a beautiful dichotomy between physicality and mental aspects that come together in this harmonious fashion to create what I believe is the best game, and especially the best team sport on the face of the planet. The areas of psychological challenges and of concern for this particular presentation are going to start with motivation, right? And motivation's on a scale. If it's high, we're going to perform better than if we're unmotivated or demotivation sets in and we don't perform as well. Motivation is going to be a huge factor. Next is racial interactions, because while this isn't necessarily prejudice of what we're talking about, but natural differences between how certain individuals perceive other individuals based upon race does play a significant factor, or at least it can potentially have a psychological component that will affect performance. Next is with feedback. Feedback is super important in the sport of football. Feedback is given all the time. Each rep, each play, we'll watch video. They're in a film room. They're getting the film broken down and feedback on each rep. Oh, this step needs to be 6 inches more to the right instead of the left. And you're getting feedback all the time as a player, and hopefully as a coach as well, you're getting lots of feedback as well, even if it is only from the boosters. The next area is skill development, or building skills. There's always going to be somebody bigger, faster, or stronger that you're going to have to go up against as an opponent. So you need your skills to reach your potential and continue to develop as much as one possibly can. And then the last area is utilizing sports psychology. Can it help? How does it help? And what potential drawbacks or stumbling blocks would be a better term for it? What stumbling blocks exist? So the first area is motivation. Anschel 2014 states that motivation can absolutely affect a performance, not only positively, but also potentially negatively as well. Ryan and Desi stipulate two different types, or two main types of motivation. Intrinsic motivation, where the motivation is inherent in the activity in and of itself. So I wash clothes because I enjoy washing clothes. Or for me personally, I cook dinner because I love cooking dinner. I wash the dishes for extrinsic motivation, because if I do the dishes, then I'm allowed to cook again by my wife. So extrinsic motivation is where I'm doing something, I'm motivated to do a particular activity, but the what is driving the motivation is from something else. So I may not like lifting weights, but I sure would like that gold medal in the Olympics. Gold medals are cool. Right? So maybe it's the medal itself that makes me want to lift weights or run the extra mile that I don't really want to run that time, but that extrinsic motivation, I'm doing this for some other gain, but I'm still motivated to do it. It's just for a different purpose. Again, according to Anschel 2014, motivation level and success are proportionate to one another. The higher motivation I am, the more likely I'm going to succeed, and especially as it relates to effort. Oftentimes, lots of coaches refer to the football season as a grind. So it can be repetitive over and over, and we need to kind of spice things up and jazz things up, or if nothing else, make sure that the motivation level is staying high. One particular way is to introduce goal setting, especially small, short-term goals that we can achieve, right? Because it's the grind. On Monday, we do this. Every Tuesday is that. Every Wednesday is this. Friday is our walkthrough. After we travel, we get to whatever we're going. Friday in the walkthrough, and then Saturday, go out and play the game. Sunday, rest, etc., etc. Rinse, recycle, repeat. So if we can goal set, right? So how many tackles for loss did we get? Oh, we had 2 last week. Can we get 3 this week? I didn't have any effort on this particular play, so can I make a play on the opposite sideline? I was tackled immediately. How many tackles can I break this week? It could be that big. It could be something that's small, but introducing goal setting can help with motivation. Absolutely, especially if those goals are measurable and they're realistic, right? I'm not going to go out and say, I'm going to run for 1,000 yards as a running back this week. Well, most people can't even do that in a season in the NCAA. So they need to be realistic. They need to have a time frame, but most importantly, they need to be measurable, right? So we can say, I'm going to play better this week. Well, what does better mean? We need to be able to have it measurable and be defined. So at the end of the event, maybe it's a game or a practice or whatever, everybody and their mom can know whether or not you attained your goal, if it's measurable. Other things that a coach could do to help with motivation is do as much stuff as we possibly can, whatever it is in anything. Whether it's a video of a highlight reel of, hey, look at these awesome NFL players, the people that you're aspiring to be. Look at these guys get out there and take care of business. Look at them practice. Look at them. Look, they just went through Hard Knocks and it's training camp, and this is a 10-year vet, and they're still going out doing the same drills that you're doing out there so they can get better. And they're in the NFL getting paid millions of dollars, right? And then you show them a game clip of them implementing that drill in a game to spring their teammate for a touchdown. For extrinsic motivation, technically speaking, Division I AA athletes do not get paid. I would argue that they do get paid, but that's not the purpose of this, because we can remind them of extrinsic benefits for extrinsic motivation benefits, that their tuition is getting paid. They are getting a free diploma, cost-free to them, as long as they go through and play football. That's the purpose of their scholarship. And there's many other fringe benefits, like all of the fun swag, all the meals that they have prepared for them. They probably don't have to wash a dish unless they want to. Also in the meeting room, a coach could highlight effort plays, especially by the substitute players that don't get to see as much playing time on Saturdays as the starters do. Show that, and then again follow it up, much like before with the NFL players, follow up and show where effort plays made a difference, right? Because effort by every single individual, from the most valuable player to the third string backup kicker, the more effort that everyone has on the team, the better that team will be, and the more likely that team will improve. The next area of psychological factors is racial interactions. Football teams are not homogenous. 44% of a football team are African American individuals, and the overwhelming number of head coaches are all Caucasian. It's an unfortunate thing, but as Lapchick 2017 in our college sports race and gender report card, it's just not the case. I mean, we got a high number of African Americans with football players, student athletes, with a tremendous amount of Caucasian coaches, and there's really this huge racial gap in those things that are over the past 5 years. Again, according to the the gender and race report card, they just keep going in the same directions and diverging from each other further and further each year instead of closing the gap. According to Anschel in 1990, these race differences can be a huge barrier to athletic performance. Really what it comes down to is, just because, again, it's not a prejudice or a racial thing where one group doesn't like the skin color of another and treats them a particular way because of this skin color. It's more of a visceral type of perception that African American players do not perceive their Caucasian head coaches that with a feeling of trust and empathy and rapport. And because of that, they don't necessarily respond to feedback, especially if it's negative feedback, which a lot of times in football it is. Negative, not necessarily in terms of yelling and screaming and cussing, but negative in the sense that, hey, that thing that you just did right there, that needs to be corrected, right? You don't run a slant on 2 steps, that needs to be a 3-step slant. And don't forget about your 5-step slant that we call a glance. That's in running this situation, ran it in that other situation you weren't supposed to, right? So there's all these constant feedback, especially negative feedback, where things need to be corrected. Where if it's somebody that's Caucasian and somebody that's African American that's going back and forth, perceptions upon how that it could be totally blocked, right? If I have my perception that I don't trust my head coach, there's no rapport. He's never invited me over to his house for a meal, right? He's never helped me move. He's never said he never asked me how my sister was, right? He doesn't even probably even know I have a sister, right? My sister's my best friend. So with those things, all of a sudden I'm getting negative feedback. Nah, forget it. I scored 10 touchdowns in our game last week, right? And all you did was give me a high five and you started talking to the O-line. Like I didn't do anything. Again, according to Anschel in 1990, African American athletes need to have their individual values to the team recognized. And I don't think that's, on a side note, I don't think that's necessarily should be taken in a negative light. I think all of us do that, right? Who doesn't like to feel good about the contributions that they made to an organization? I know I do. In my teaching life, I like when my boss says, hey, you did a good job and your scores are great with your classes, or whatever the case may be. The last piece to the racial interactions that could be a negative barrier to success is that Anschel in 1990 found that sometimes it is possible for African American individuals to put their own individual success above the team success. Okay, so we know that this particular barrier could exist. How do we work around it? I think the easiest thing is this word right here: culture. Build a culture of trust and rapport and empathy. Those guys, and I don't know if anyone is bigger than the other, but they all three need to be there. Players need to know that their coaches care about them. They need to know that their coaches are going to be there for them to help them move their furniture from one apartment to the next over the summer if they need it. They need to be able to invite them over for food, to play video games in the locker room with, to ask, hey, how's your mom doing? Or, they got a little sister and he happened to mention that the little sister had a quiz or a test or something. So simple to walk by and say, hey, how did Jennifer do on her quiz that you told me about the other day? Right? Because lots of good things like that. Ask about their family, ask about their girlfriends or boyfriends, or whatever the case is. Anything that can be about building the relationship between the player and the coach is a benefit. Another one of those areas is simply, hey, why don't you ask a player for some advice, right? Like, hey, my Spotify is getting a little lame these days, right? Or my Pandora, what are you listening to? What's the best thing to listen to these days? Right? Give me some. I need your expertise. The guy said that you're great at knowing what's the latest goings on with music. Or, hey, you know what? I haven't seen a really good movie in a while. What's the last movie you saw? I heard you're kind of a movie buff, right? Anything to make the extra personal connection, to increase trust, to increase rapport, and to be able to show through actions that you have empathy with the players. Is going to help, all right? And that's all part of culture. Feedback is an absolute essential element of how a football team operates and disseminates information, and coaches is the clearest term for that. Presented in a lot of different teaching styles and a lot of different manners, but eventually the athletes are going to go perform it, and the coaches aren't just going to stand there, right? They're going to provide feedback as to whether it's positive feedback or negative feedback, but to help develop that skill, feedback is given. It is quintessential for football. The kicker becomes, how do individuals respond to the feedback? I would imagine and guess that most people respond positively or in a good way to positive feedback. Gregory and Day from 2017 back me up on that one too. Where it gets a little bit dicey is the corrective feedback, which is negative feedback, right? This needs to be corrected in some way, shape, or form. How do we respond to that negative feedback? The mindset going into that particular process is crucial, because ultimately the coach wants to provide feedback for the players to get better. If an individual has a shut off or a fixed mindset where, man, I can't do anything right, I'm not very motivated to play well, I got another starter in front of me, I just got to wait out my turn till next year and I got to be the starter, so there's nothing I can do now, so why give all this effort? It's a very fixed mindset. It's probably not going to pay a lot of dividends. It's not going to give a lot of effort. And any negative feedback won't be assimilated in the way that is going to be beneficial for that individual, nor for the team. And it surely wasn't the way the coach intended it to be, right? The coach is trying to help the individual perform better. Conversely, if we are more mindful of feedback and have that mindset from get-go, again, Gregory and Dave from 2017 say, man, even the most negative or constructive feedback that we can possibly have will be received and assimilated for application for success. Not everyone is born with that mindset. So again, culture is a huge component of being able to have or be mindful of feedback and negative feedback. Gregory and Dave point out how easy it is with a mindful mindset to be able to have and assimilate all of that feedback, regardless if it's positive or negative, which comes back to the culture that a particular coach can create. If we're constantly improving, and that's the goal, right? Shoot for the stars and land on the moon. That's an adage where we can always try to improve and always try to get better. We may not reach perfection, but we're going to be much better team and much better individuals if we try or strive for perfection. Key to help building this aspect of culture is to make sure to point out that leaders are not infallible, right? As Borland, Kane, and Burton of 2015 point out, the leaders have to be able to show that they can make mistakes. And mistakes are okay, and we can definitely learn from our mistakes. And if we're learning from our mistakes, they're not failures, right? It's part of the learning process, and it's more importantly part of the improvement process. It's okay to make mistakes, so that players shouldn't feel a tremendous amount of pressure to go out and perform every single thing perfectly the very first rep. That doesn't happen, right? So mistakes are okay. We're going to improve from them. We're going to learn from them. And the coach should make sure that they point out their mistakes to everybody else to help build that culture of constant improvement. Additionally, to help with the culture of constant improvement, every team has a stud, a star player. Whether you're a 0-12 team or a or a 12-0 team or anything else in between, they all have a star player. So again, in those meeting rooms, if that coach can show, right, that star player giving great effort and working on a particular skill, right, and then making a mistake with that skill, and then showing effort and improving on that skill, and then now in the game they do that skill almost to perfection. They execute it with great technique, right? That's another way to show, hey, I'm just going to keep trying with this. I'm going to keep trying with this, and eventually success will come. It's a part of that culture of constant success. And it also goes back to that mindfulness and a mindfulness mindset that we have for constant improvement and being able to accept the feedback. The next area of psychological factors for collegiate football is building skills. Now, there's a joke in the NFL that the NFL stands for not for long, meaning you're not going to stick around very long if you're not trying to improve. There's always going to be somebody that's bigger, stronger, and faster than what you are, so you need to constantly improve. And football coaches, they spend countless hours trying to figure out this scheme and that scheme, and you guys run over here this way and you'll go this way, and it'll confuse them, and we'll meet in the middle and sack the quarterback. So they try to come up with all these different schemes that are totally rendered useless if their Jimmies are better than our Joes. If their players are better than our players. So we constantly have to improve in our techniques and in our abilities if we're going to be successful. It can't rest on our laurels. At one point, if this individual, these student athletes in college, right, if they have a Division I scholarship, they're a pretty gosh darn football player out of high school, right? So chances are that they may have had a poor technique at some stage that was reinforced in a positive manner, right? Just based upon the result. Hey, you got a sack, good job. Or hey, you caught the ball. But you're not going to catch the ball against a Division I defensive back. You're not going to be able to get that sack against a Division I offensive lineman. So they have these bad habits that have developed and been unfortunately reinforced over time. So college coaches, we have to transform those poor habits into great technique. Or even if it's not poor technique, it could just be simply for the first time that individual is not the biggest, strongest, and fastest. People are now bigger and stronger and faster than them, and they need to develop some better techniques or develop the techniques that they have and fine-tune them better, because a player that constantly experiences negative results or negative outcomes is going to become unmotivated, according to Ansel 2014. One area where a coach could help try to prevent that demotivation, or I'm getting my booty kicked all the time, or I need to improve, right? Goal setting absolutely functions and applies in this avenue, right? I'm going to use this correct chop rip technique 70% of the time in practice today. Well, it's on film. We can go back and count, right, as we go. Or I'm not going to get beat on the inside when I'm in press coverage today. Great, it's on film. We can see. We can go back and look, right? Great small-term goals for practice, okay? Let alone in the game, they can all apply. Another area would be the relapse prevention model would absolutely be applicable here, especially as it relates to trying to break bad habits or teach new skills. It applies to it all. Martlet and George in 1984 originally came up with this relapse prevention model. There's two key points to this, but before we go into the key points, just want to make a side note that they presented in their original paper that a lapse is not necessarily a relapse, right? It is not all or nothing, right? So in the original paper, they talked about smoking, right? I quit smoking. I'm doing great for about a month. And all of a sudden, I have one cigarette. So having one lapse or one cigarette in that particular example does not mean that it's an all or nothing response and I have to go back to smoking 12 cartons a day. It's not an all or none thing. It's a lapse. So how do we deal with this and prevent the total relapse? The first part of it is recognize high risk situations. In the area of football, that's recognizing when I need to accomplish what technique. Defensive line coach is going to sit there and hike a million balls with an offensive lineman lined up across from him and give them a high shoulder and a low shoulder in and a low shoulder out and then a high with the low and all the different avenues to help them recognize when different situations present themselves and then when to execute that particular technique. Right? If it's high shoulder, pass rush outside, work the chop rip, right? If it's down low block, I'm going to squeeze and shuffle or surf all the way down the line and wrong arm it, right? So when to produce what technique. So recognize those high risk situations. The other avenue or big thing, again, when Marlon George first proposed it, is environmental or global situations, right? If you're an alcoholic and you're trying to quit drinking, don't go to bars. Okay, so how does that apply to football? Well, again, it comes back to culture. One idea is to create a game, right? And individuals in this game, again, everything's the eye in the sky doesn't lie. You can see on this, and we keep track of how many situations presented themselves. Okay, and did you do the right thing? All right, you got points. And you can count points for practice or break it down into percentage or whatever the case may be, right? You can get everybody in on it, right? So, right, when this player over here is going for his repetition, you got all of his buddies over here that are in line watching and waiting and ready to go for him, right? So this person right here recognizes this guy. Well, okay, give him a point, right? Give that guy a point too, right? Because it's all, if we're trying to recognize these situations, hey, let's put it in the game, right? And let's have these guys give feedback. Hey, great job on that chop rip you just did. Or hey, make sure and hit it down with the forearm, right? Because now they're watching and they're getting more feedback. That's all going back to the culture. Now, we're creating a game in this culture, right? It's almost like a mini culture within our other culture of constant improvement that we're all sharing and connected with because we all have a whole bunch of trust, a whole bunch of rapport, and a whole bunch of empathy with one another. Gosh, culture's great. The last psychological factor for this particular presentation is utilizing sports psychology. Sports psychology can and absolutely does influence performance. Utilizing sports psychology can greatly enhance performance. Fenker and Lambioet in 1987, they did a case study with a university Division I football program down in Texas. And it was very interesting. They used a lot of mental imagery. One thing that I thought was very interesting, they said, no, we're not going to talk about winning, right? And all the coaches were on board. I mean, some begrudgingly, but they were all on board. And the sports psychologists came in and they gave their talks and they met with individual players one-on-one, and they did the mental imagery and they did some other coping skills mechanisms, right, to make sure you're not too high, you're not too low, but you're right in that perfect zone for your performance, and what to do and different situations present themselves, etc. But one thing that they found was that team cohesion was through the roof. Direct quotes from players talking about that by themselves without having to be prodded to get there. Empathy was huge, not just between player and coach, but player to player, coach to coach, and player to coach. And the trust amongst all those groups as well increased through the roof. Whew, that is a tough team that cares about one another, that trusts one another. I don't think anybody wants to play those guys, right? And the proverbial proof is in the pudding. Even though they didn't talk about winning at all, they turned around and it had like a 2-loss season, right? And they weren't exactly 0 for the century before this particular case study, but that was a huge turnaround. Like maybe from winning 2 games to only losing 2 games over the course of a season, just back-to-back seasons. It's remarkable. The way that they stated in the case study was focusing on the individual things that the players and the coaches can control. Also, John Wooden, according to Johnson in 2004, focused on the same thing. Let's not talk about winning. Let's not talk about the huge elephant in the room. Let's focus on the things that we can control, right? I can't control who's the president or who's the vice president or who's the secretary of education, but I can control my vote. I can control whether or not I bring home a paycheck. I can control how I operate in my classroom, how I do in this KIN552 class. I need to focus on the things that I can control. And John Wooden, who is arguably, I don't know what much of an argument there is, but arguably one of the greatest coaches to ever coach anything in the history of sports, he never said the word win, according to Johnson. Never. right? He was always focused on the little things, which is the same thing that Fechner and Lambinet in their case studies said. Let's not talk about winning. Let's talk about the things that we can control, right? And focus on the things that we can control and let the big things take care of themselves. Right? Because if we focus on the little things, the big things will take control of themselves. All right, so that's great, right? Let's have sports psychology be a part of all of our football teams. Unfortunately, according to Martin et al., 1997, there's a huge stigma in utilizing sports psychologists and sports psychology in general, right? Males more so than females, and African Americans more than other races have this stigma about using sports psychology. It has grown better over the years, but really at a snail's pace, according to Martin et al. Okay, so we have this great thing that nobody wants to use. I smell culture again, right? Because coaches have to create within the culture that it's okay to use sports psychology. So we can highlight somebody like Chip Kelly that's used sports psychology at his stops in sports science, really, at every single stop that he's had. Either before University of Oregon, he's utilizing sports psychology. Absolutely. Pete Carroll, that in his stops at USC and with the Seattle Seahawks, he still has a foundational relationship and a great empathy with a sports psychology mentor of his from when he was a graduate assistant or one of his first years as coaching at University of the Pacific. They still talk all the time. It's fundamental, a part of their coaching and who they are as a coach and how they communicate and build empathy and rapport with their players. Showing your players that, yeah, this sports psychology stuff, it doesn't mean anything that you may perceive it to mean as it relates to the stigma. No, it's cool. And part of that is don't knock it till you try it. Right? So let's bring in a sports psychologist. Let's mandate that, you mandate to go to weights. Let's mandate that we go and utilize sports psychology. Maybe baby steps at first, and then progressively get better and keep track of how things went with the sports psychology and when things went without the sports psychology. But we have to ingratiate them to be able to employ sports psychology, right? And they got to be able to see coaches using that as well. How else can we destigmatize it if we don't use it? But hey, we want you to use it, but we're not going to use it either. Oh my gosh, of course coaches can use it, right? So the more that we show and create it as part of our culture, maybe have a whole group visualization period, right? Using imagery. That would be great, right? Anything and anything for everybody to show everybody else, hey, this stuff's cool, and we're going to be better because of the sports psychology stuff. We could get on Google Scholar and find some research papers about the use of sports psychology and the benefits. Anything and everything where we could show, right? Not just tell, but show how student-athlete performance will increase with the use of sports psychology. That's going to help destigmatize the barrier. And help performance too. Awesome. While motivation might be the biggest direct impact on our performance at any given moment, let's make no mistake about it. Culture is the one that's driving this bus to help with all these psychological factors that we identified. Culture is going to help with feedback that is so important to how we coach and how we operate in midst of football. Culture is going to help with race interactions between players and coaches, players and players, coaches and coaches. Culture is going to help with skill development, integrating the relapse prevention model, right? Helping us to make sure and build a culture within our culture, within our games, and culture is going to help set our goals and make goals cool, which all of this helps with motivation and provides sources of motivation, whether it's intrinsic motivation or extrinsic motivation. All of this that stems from culture helps for motivation and helps improve performance. A big thing to think about here is what happens when a student athlete isn't going to respond positively to our culture and to our feedback, despite in our relapse prevention model and our sources of intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation that we have. What do we do then? Well, I think a key piece has to be that, man, if you're a Division I or Division II coach, that should start at the recruitment stage, right? What type of athlete are you recruiting? But still, then, I don't think you can ever give up, right? These are all sound things that are well researched. So yeah, we just need to find different avenues, right? No, God didn't create any one of us identically the same, and even though that we did, right? I mean, identical twins still look different. They still have their own personalities and their own. So anyways, God created us all different, right? So we don't all fit into the same box, right? So a great coach is going to have lots of tools to help that individual. And not that they have to conform to the culture, but the culture is set up for success. Multiple tools to help motivate that young individual for success, to embrace the culture and benefit from the culture and be a wonderful part of the team. Thank you for a wonderful semester. My hat's off to you, Dr. G. Flanagan out.
Peace out.